We are all familiar with the image of Lady Justice. She is depicted with a pair of scales in one hand, representing the weighing of the evidence, and a sword in the other hand, representing the power of the state to inflict punishment. But perhaps the most defining and enigmatic feature of Lady Justice is her blindfold. Why would we think of justice in this way? What does it mean when people say justice is blind, and where does that come from? Being blind is a limitation, so why would we want Lady Justice to be blind? We just gave this woman a sword, and we expect her to use it. Why do we want to blind her? She'll just be swinging away and lopping off heads left and right. She'll be like a bull in a china shop, and who knows who she will hit? She's blind! It's a recipe for disaster. Wouldn't it be better for Lady Justice to be able to see? It just seems obvious. This reminds me of the famous phrase from the classic movie Spaceballs. Evil will always triumph because good is dumb. Aren't we being dumb wanting to limit Lady Justice in this way? Well, maybe. But Lady Justice being blind is not about being blind to the facts. Indeed, true justice will be a result of considering all the relevant evidence, and this is accounted for in the image by Lady Justice's scales, which weigh all the evidence. So Lady Justice is not blind to the facts, but rather, she is blind to the status of the parties in court. For example, if a man rapes a woman, he should be punished according to what he has done. But imagine he is a rich man, while she is from a low-class family. More than that, he is a pillar of the community, and even personal friends with the judge. Lady Justice is blind to all these matters and dictates that he must be punished. So, with all of that said, where does the idea of justice being blind come from? The first thing I think of is the statues used in our court system. Is this a specifically American concept? Does it go all the way back to the Pilgrims? Or is it something from the Constitution? Maybe it comes from a later amendment. Or was this an idea that goes all the way back to English common law? The answer might surprise you. From the book of James, chapter 2. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man with filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand there," or "Sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? What I really like about this verse is that it paints a very colorful and clear example. We are given the stark contrast between a rich man in fine clothes and wearing a golden ring, and a poor man with filthy old clothes. And we can imagine how these two images might influence us differently. This thought experiment is not in the context of a court, but rather a church or home gathering. And at the time it was written, this was a very practical consideration. The church was booming, and people of all walks of life were flooding in. How should we, in this setting, be treating these people? Should we give special treatment to the rich? James says no. Further still, he says that such thoughts are evil. And I think this is a very common sentiment nowadays. But it was not always so. Most of history was about the powerful lording it over the weak, dominating, and taking every advantage. This idea of equal treatment regardless of status is radical, and it ultimately goes back to the first books of the Bible. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor, or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. If we were to boil this whole concept down into one short quote, this is perhaps the best we could do. Our goal is to judge fairly in the courts, to make our determinations based only on the relevant evidence and without consideration for social status or other secondary characteristics. The verse says that we should not show favoritism to the great. Now, I don't know what y'all see online, but in my time scouring the internet, I've encountered a number of videos where someone is pulled over for insane, reckless driving, and wouldn't you know it, they often use the exact same phrase. They say, "Don't you know who I am?" It's always some city councilman or cop or son of the mayor who's trying to leverage their status to get off the hook. But you know what? No one is above the law. At least that's how it's supposed to work. This verse also introduces the concept of favoring the poor. The book of Exodus also talks about this. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd, and do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. We talked quite a bit about favoring the rich. But what does it look like to favor the poor? I think that this mostly comes from an attitude of compassion or mercy based on the lowly circumstances of the guilty. We might find ourselves saying phrases like, "Well, yes, he did steal her laptop, but she can afford to buy a new one while he has nothing." Or, "He had lots of those and he didn't really need them anyway." Or, "I would never side with a corporation. I'm for the little guy." All these statements, in one way or another, subvert the course of true justice by making the law and the evidence play second fiddle to something else. Another point about this section, remember how it starts? Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. Now, consider the following example. Someone dies and people are upset. Crowds flood the streets in protest. The medical examiner in the case concludes the examination of the body and says the following. What happens when the actual evidence doesn't match up with the public narrative that everyone's already decided on? This is the kind of case that ends careers. He feels under immense pressure because so many have already made up their minds, and the evidence goes against them. What will happen if he speaks the truth? The crowd could become upset with him, and he may lose his job. The pressure to go along with the crowd is very strong, both for those in the courts and also in our daily lives. But the Bible is clear that our role is to stick to the evidence and the truth. We have seen how the Bible specifically mentions not to judge people based on whether they are rich or poor. But are those the only factors we should consider? Or are there other bases for equal justice? Deuteronomy 1:16. Hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly, whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Foreigners in this context would be people who are living alongside the Israelites, but who are not in covenant with God. They were generally of a different race, and, for example, they would not take part in the Passover. So, firstly, God does not unfairly favor his people in matters of justice. It is also clear that God commands us not to judge people differently on the basis of race. And this was when I realized that this concept is actually very closely connected to another topic which I had considered to be unrelated: prejudice. Prejudice can come in different forms, but we usually think about it as judging someone on the basis of their race without considering what they've done that would actually make them a good or bad person. Characterized in this way, the similarities are hard to overlook, and our modern disapprobation of prejudice seems very much in line with what the Bible teaches, if not outright based on it. As I was studying for this video, I was surprised to discover that this was not simply a verse or two which might be misread. No, this was a consistent theme throughout the Bible, which says that we are not to show partiality, and especially not in matters of the law. In addition to all these verses about how we ought to judge, this is also given as a key characteristic of the Messiah. In Isaiah 11, beginning in verse 3, we read, "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth." This verse is spectacular because it reiterates the concept, but also introduces the familiar metaphor of one who judges, but not based on what they see. In addition to this, Luke 20 describes a time when Jesus was greeted, and they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" There are a lot of details about this account that I'm leaving out for the sake of brevity, and it is not clear what their intentions are in this situation, but it does seem likely that they are aware of the messianic expectation and are playing into it. Another way that this is described in the Bible is judging by appearances. And here we might also think of this as illusion versus reality, a topic on which volumes have been written, and if we are not careful, we will end up deep in the mire of philosophy. But we are commanded in the New Testament not to judge by appearances, and this is reminiscent of the part in the Old Testament where David was selected by God, not based on his appearance, but because of his heart. And we are told that the Lord looks at the heart. This is the repeated and consistent message of the Bible, going back to the very beginning, over 3,000 years ago. Furthermore, the image of Messiah judging not based on what he sees in Isaiah 11 is very similar to the idea of Lady Justice being blind. So this is not a uniquely American or British concept originating in the last millennium. At this point, I am sure some would say, okay, sure, it's in the Bible, but this is super basic morality, and it's probably in all the religions and ancient laws. This is one element of a common way of thinking, which says that all religions are basically the same and that the Bible isn't that different. It's just another holy book. I'm not going to give an entire breakdown of why that's wrong here, but it may be an idea for the future. Let me know if you would like to see a video on that topic. But the Bible is basically just like the Code of Hammurabi, right? Well, I looked through the Code of Hammurabi to try to find something related to how to treat people based on their status. The closest I could find was this: if anyone strikes the body of a man higher in rank than he shall receive 60 blows with an ox whip in public. If a free-born man strike the body of another free-born man, or equal rank, he shall pay 1 gold mina. If a freedman strike the body of another freedman, he shall pay 10 shekels in money. If the slave of a freedman strike the body of a freedman, his ear shall be cut off. This is not an apples to apples comparison, but it does make me really wonder whether people of different ranks would be judged fairly in such a society. Interestingly, if you ask ChatGPT which ancient document talks about judging fairly regardless of social status, the Code of Hammurabi is its top suggestion. But if you press it regarding where the Code of Hammurabi makes such statements, ChatGPT flounders. So I don't think the Code of Hammurabi has anything like it. Let me know in the comments below if you think there is anything like it anywhere else. Having considered all the elements of this discussion, I think most of these principles are deeply rooted in our laws and in our hearts. It is an example of the success of the kingdom of God, and it is so much a part of the water we swim in that we don't even realize it and we take it for granted. It is a great feature of our culture that ensures everyone is treated fairly, but it hasn't always been this way, and if we aren't careful, we may lose it.